Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Dentistry Unmasked. My name is David Rice, and here, as always, with
Hello, everybody. Pamela Maragliano-Muniz. Today is going to be really interesting because we've had Chip Fitchner on before, and we've talked about invisible DSOs or IDSOs. And it's interesting that people are worried right now, right? Because there's a presidency that's going to happen, election that's coming. We're still worried about what's going on in the world as far as the economic climate. And Chip is going to give us an update about what is going on here. So, Chip, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I apologize for my appearance. I am on my August cruise on my boat. I have to be in Portsmouth, New Hampshire today, which is a beautiful town. If you've never been here, I highly recommend it. And last night I was anchored in Pam's home harbor of Salem, Massachusetts, also a very cool town. So
You, you picked a
thanks for
beautiful time
thanks for
to
having me.
come. Thank you
Ah,
for being here. So,
absolutely.
what's new? Is anything new that's happening, or is there anything not new? What's going on in the world of ISDSOs?
You know, the invisible DSOs are becoming more popular partners for dentists because the invisible DSO becomes a doctor's silent partner by buying anywhere between 51 and 80% of the practice for cash up front. That cash is taxed predominantly at long-term capital gains tax rates of 20% federal. And the doctor gets to benefit from the resources of that larger silent partner. And those resources are changing. Today, many of the invisible DSOs, due to their size, have been, for example, able to negotiate better reimbursement rates from insurance payers than independent dentists get. And they're obviously paying 25 to 30% less for supplies and 50% less for implants and 15% less for employee or team benefits. So their power of being able to help an independent dentist as a silent partner is growing because the invisible DSOs are growing. So today there are, close to 1,000 invisible DSOs out there today. We consider less than 100 of those to be qualified to bid on our clients. Some of them will fail. It's a good time to be very careful in how you choose your invisible DSO partner. But thank goodness in the first 6 months of the year, over $5 billion in new capital and financing was provided to the invisible DSOs to continue their expansion and growth. Unfortunately, that has impacted values, and we're still getting record values for our clients. We closed $154 million of these partnerships in July alone, and the majority of that was for practices at over 10 times EBITDA, which is not something we did regularly 2 years ago. So values are actually up for great practices. You got to have a growing practice, though. If you're a shrinking practice, different story. Sorry for the monologue, but exciting time.
No, that's good. So, what defines a great practice? I mean, growth is a piece of it, but what makes one practice worth 10 times EBITDA versus one that's worth five versus one that, an invisible DSO says like, "Hey, thank you, but no, thank you."
Great question. The answer really starts with size. The invisible DSOs don't start bidding up until a practice has at least a $500,000 in EBITDA or operating profit after factoring in paying the doctor to do what they do every day. Many doctors think EBITDA is what they take home every year, not only for doing dentistry, but as the practice owner. The reality is EBITDA is after paying the doctor on a go-forward basis, whatever market rate comp may be. And it's different whether it's a GP or specialist, and it's geographically variable. So 500,000 in EBITDA is sort of the ticket into the high value game. We haven't done a transaction in a long time at less than 7 times EBITDA. And the practices that are going to qualify for double digit or 10x are those that have the following characteristics. Number one, they're growing at least double digit rates in 24 versus 23. Number two, they preferably have a younger doctor. If it's a 1, 2, or 3 doctor practice, a younger doctor is going to get a higher value than a doctor who's my age, and I'm 64, old, tired, ugly. And so it pays to be young in this business. Of our $1 billion in transactions in the last 24 months, 150 million of that has been for doctors in their 30s. The younger doctors are beginning to grasp the resources that these groups can provide them. So growth and geography, interestingly, 2 years ago, geography was very slanted towards the Sun Belt growing states from a value perspective, but we've done 10 times EBITDA deals in Michigan and Vermont as two examples that you wouldn't think of as rapidly growing Sun Belt states. And we've done those in the last 90 days. So it's interesting that you don't have to be in Florida, Tennessee, Texas, Georgia, Arizona, South Carolina, Utah, Idaho, Colorado to get a phenomenal value today. And these groups are really looking to diversify their footprint, and COVID sort of drove that. So young, growing, profitable, and eager for a partner.
Question about the younger dentist. So say there's an older dentist that's the primary owner. They decide to partner with an IDSO. They have a younger associate. Who's to say the associate's going to stay?
Ooh, excellent question. And we run into that very regularly. And fortunately, the path that most of the quality invisible DSOs will take to answer that question is they will, in conjunction with the owner doctor, have a discussion with that associate and say, hey, look, you're the future of this practice. We want you to be an owner because you're the future of this practice. And so therefore, as a part of this transaction, we are going to create an ownership opportunity for you. And in many cases, they will grant that associate doctor equity in the parent company that will vest over a period of time, often 5 years, so that the associate basically gets a free gift of a multi-million-dollar opportunity without going to the bank, without writing a check, without taking any risk. But that's the trade that he's making for signing up for a 5-year employment agreement as a part of the process for his elder owner doctor. And that's always a very interesting situation. But the invisible DSOs are built on the philosophy of we want owner doctors. So they're happy to give those associates, not just existing associates, but future recruits, equity opportunities.
That's interesting. Is there a difference for a general practice versus a specialty practice, and maybe some specialty practices do better than others, or not so much?
No, it's interesting. So in the last 8 years, you have seen the focus on specialty grow dramatically. So 8 years ago, there were no ortho only invisible DSOs. Today, there are 14. If we go back 6 years ago, there were no oral surgery only invisible DSOs. Today, there are 17. There are endo only invisible DSOs, perio only invisible DSOs, and of course, my favorite in the specialty, which is the dental trifectas, which are eager for pedos, orthos, and oral surgeons only in the same communities. And those folks continue to be the high bidders at the moment. So it's happening in GP and specialty across the board. And they all believe, all of the good invisible DSOs believe that you want to make your associates owners because it's golden handcuffs, stops turnover, gives them upside. I mean, it's a win-win for both groups.
Any sort of transition with a practice owner, it's emotional. And I know that it's hard to let go, even a part of your practice. So how are doctors taking this transition? Is this something that, because they, as part of it, they don't want to lose their autonomy. And I feel like that's one of the biggest concerns, that they might even give up the potential for a larger check, paycheck at the end of all of this to maintain their autonomy until the end.
100% agree with you. It is my number one question and the number one concern that my clients have. But the reality is these groups do not want to change the doctor's autonomy. And the groups that we deal with, you talk about autonomy, and if you go with a traditional branded DSO, a big one with a big name, you're going to continue to have clinical autonomy because that's the rules, right? In the invisible DSO partnerships, the doctors have full autonomy, not just clinical. They're the ones making the decision as to who to hire, who to fire, when to be open, what supplies to buy or not buy, what labs to use or not use. And doctors ultimately are shocked at how much autonomy they keep. And the way we prove that up to our clients in the process is once we get down to the finalists, we'll typically have 6 or more bidders for our clients. And we'll narrow that down to 1 or 2 finalists. And before anything happens, before we even talk about a letter of intent, we're going to put our clients on the phone with other doctors that have joined that particular invisible DSO that they're considering. And they're going to have a doc-to-doc conversation. And they're going to ask questions like, what happened? What changed? What didn't change? Did you really get full autonomy? And so they go into these transactions knowing that they really do get full autonomy. Now, that doesn't mean things won't change. These groups are going to take over a lot of the administrative minutia. They're going to take over banking, payroll, accounting, benefits administration, compliance, credentialing, tax, legal, IT support, and vendor and payer negotiations. And after that, they're all different. Some have some of them have 24 people full-time in their headquarters helping their partner practices recruit everything from front desk to doctor. And other groups are phenomenal negotiators with the various vendors, and that's why they're paying 30% less, and you will then be paying 30% less for supplies, for example. But you really do retain the autonomy. It's the number one doctor's concern. So we have to prove that up in our process that they're going to get to keep their autonomy because they do with the right ones. Choose the wrong one, different story. They'll promise autonomy and not deliver. In our process, the groups that we let bid on our clients deliver the full autonomy.
So that it sounds like it's very important. As you mentioned, there's this giant ocean of potential people out there, and you've narrowed it to a pretty select group. If you're working in that select group, like, okay, what's the catch?
The catch is you have to choose the right partner that's the right cultural fit for you.
Mm-hmm.
Having multiple bidders is great, and that's what enables us to get high values for our clients. But the reality is the most important thing is who's the right cultural fit for you. There's one group out there, for instance, very large invisible DSO, and a lot of people consider them a fraternity because they have a lot of young male doctors. And my female clients always say, no, I don't want to go there because they're a male fraternity. Well, that's their culture. That's what they attract. As an example, I heard you guys in Florida, the former president of the Florida Dental Association was a client of ours. And he chose a particular invisible DSO because he at the time was 62 years old and he wanted to go with a group with an average age young doctors. So he went with a group that had 400 doctors with an average age of 44. And he said, I'm going with these guys because they're young and they'll keep me young, even though I'm old. And I'm like, fantastic. So the trick is once you get them past being qualified to bid, the trick is to find the ones that is the right cultural fit, because if we all do this correctly, you're going to spend the balance of your career with, and they're all so different. So it's important that you understand not just who their financial backers are, and not just who their management is, and not just their financial statements, but ultimately understanding what their culture is.
So how does it work? So say, for example, don't worry, everybody at my office, I'm not talking about me. I'm using me as an example. Say I want to consider this and I call you up and I'm like, Chip, okay, I want to be considered for an IDSO. So what does that look like? Do you sit down with me and kind of do a soul search with me to kind of see where my values lie and kind of match me with IDSOs that might see things the same way I do?
Yeah, ultimately, but we start with, any doctor should set up a time to talk to me because we're both going to learn something. I promise. It's a free call. And in that process, I'm going to talk about your practice and your goals. And then if you qualify, just from a general size standpoint, we're going to ask you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which binds both of us to nothing but confidentiality. And then we're going to take a look at your P&L statements for 22, 23, and 24. One of my analysts is going to call you or whoever knows your numbers the best. And we're going to come up with our view of the value of your practice. And then you and I will have another call and say, hey, doctor, we went through your practice. You have a beautiful practice. I think the value of it is going to be 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, whatever the number is. And then all of a sudden you have the data to say, wait a minute, this is kind of interesting. But then it's an education process before you actually become a client. I want to understand what your goals are so that I can make sure that before you become a client, we're going to be able to provide you at least 6 qualified bidders in the process. And it may be some doctors say, I want to leave in 3 years, or some say, I want to stay here for the next 10 years and add 10 more offices. So it's at that point, we try and, before we take a client, make sure that it's a client that we can do a great job for. Once you become a client, then we're going to introduce you to multiple qualified bidders, and you'll ultimately meet with 3 of them face to face, after hours practice tour, dinner, etc. And so ultimately, in our process, it costs you nothing until you put money in the bank, and you're never obligated to do anything. And my promise to every doctor is, let's have a conversation, because I learned something from every doctor I talk to, and I hope that every doctor who talks to me learns something from me.
Have you ever had a doctor call you up and say, look, I'm going to get out probably in about 5 years. This is what my practice numbers look like. I want you to make me the most money, and I don't care what I have to do over the course of those 5 years to achieve that?
That's an interesting question. And the reality is, in these transactions, the doctor is going to negotiate, or we're going to negotiate for him or her, an employment agreement that basically says, here's what you're going to do for the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Here's how much you're going to work, how many days a week you're going to work, et cetera. And I have never done one of those employment agreement negotiations where the doctor was asked to, nor agreed to, work 1 minute longer than what they worked last year. So the answer is yes. If a doctor said, I want to dig in, and instead of working 3 days a week, I want to work 6, they're going to benefit from that new effort through what we call the COVID earnout. COVID earnout is something that came about during COVID. And it basically says, we're going to pay you after we become your partner. We're going to adjust the purchase price up based on your performance in the 2 years after our initial partnership. So those doctors all of a sudden have a multi-million-dollar incentive to actually work and grow. So in some cases, we've seen that happen. But as a general rule, no doctor has ever agreed to work 1 minute more than they did last year. It's kind of the benchmark.
I like that. All right. Slightly different question, but kind of important. Florida opens up their state. And, maybe there's a couple dentists out there who decide, hey, maybe I'm going to start another practice later on in my career. How much history do you have to show? Is it more than 3 years to show that you can grow at that rate? You can be highly profitable? Is there like,
No, it's interesting. It's very certainly, any of these groups are going to want to look at the history of the practice,
sure.
but the most important period of time is the trailing 12 months,
Okay.
because it's, what have you done for me lately? That is the most important thing to them. And certainly they're going to look back, but we have partnered doctors whose practices are less than 5 years old. We did a transaction late last year, $43 million value for a 39-year-old doctor. He started the practice from scratch. This was not a real old practice. So the age of the practice, frankly, is irrelevant. It's really, what has the performance been in the last 12 months?
I'm curious, what percentage of that 43 did that doctor get at close versus hung out later?
He got about 60% of that in cash, and 40% of it he took as equity in the parent company that he was partnering with. And it was really a phenomenal transaction, because the group that he partnered with was a brand new invisible DSO. He was functionally the platform practice. And the magic of that one was the investors who had formed this, the group that wrote him a check, had done this 5 times before. They had started, built, and monetized 5 other invisible DSOs. And their track record at that point, they had returned over $3.5 billion from invisible DSOs to their doctors and investors. So we were putting this guy in the right place at the right time with the right group, and he's been phenomenally successful since then. And that
awesome.
was 8 months
That's
ago.
incredible. I love hearing these stories, but I have to ask, these deals are 100% dependent on the financial health of the parent company. What happens if the
Yes.
parent company isn't healthy in 5 or so years when the doctor wants to finally transition out?
That is a great question, and it's important to choose wisely. Again, 1,000 invisible DSOs out there. We consider less than 100 of those qualified to bid on our clients. And what disqualifies an invisible DSO from being able to bid on our clients is a long list of things, ranging from their financials, their debt levels, their interest coverage, their management. And another interesting one that you can look at is who are the doctors that they've partnered with. The great invisible DSOs partner with great doctors. The marginal invisible DSOs partner with marginal doctors. And when we see an invisible DSO that is partnered with a doctor that we decline to represent, we know that invisible DSO is digging at the bottom of the barrel. So ultimately, the nice thing is dentistry is pretty consistent. And if you're a reasonably good manager with a reasonably smart pocketbook, you're not going to screw it up too bad. Have these groups failed? Yeah, absolutely. Have any of the groups that we partnered our doctors with failed? Not yet. Knock on wood. 8 years. That may change. But yeah, right now you've got to be really careful because there are some real charlatans out there with no money trying to partner with practices using what I call the bag of marbles strategy, the standard, gee whiz, take our magic paper and 5 years from now you'll get rich. And you've got to be really careful with that. So the answer is it's a risk. You have to be careful.
I got to tell you,
Wow.
Chip, I so appreciate your transparency. And I mean, your knowledge is clearly off the charts. So I enjoy your company in general, but your transparency is so appreciated because I think it's really important for every dentist, whatever path they're going to choose, to have the whole picture and not just part of the picture. Pam, I want to know more.
I know, I do
We're
too.
we're in the education business.
Yeah.
90% of the doctors I talk to will never become my clients, or maybe they'll become clients after I'm dead. But it's about education. Every doctor should understand invisible DSOs because, like it or not, if you have a larger practice, let's say with 2 million in collections or above, your only high value exit is going to be in an invisible DSO partnership. You're not going to be able to do a doctor-doc transaction at a market value. And they're coming. They're in your town today. There are invisible DSOs in all 50 states, and they can be fierce competitors. So you need to at least understand them. Even if you have no desire to become a partner with one, you need to know what they look like. You need to know how they operate, and you need to know what they're going to do when they come to your town because they're coming in with 30% lower costs. They're coming in with powerful marketing. They're coming in with recruiting tools where they can give people you want to hire equity and you can't. So it's something everybody should understand because $5 billion in new capital in 6 months, this is not going away.
It sounds to me like it's worth the conversation, at least kind of understanding where you stand as a practice, where you could go, and what this could look like for you in your future. So, Chip, where can people reach you and where can they start generating this conversation for you so they can get their own story?
So largepracticesales.com, pretty simple domain name, is our website, or you can email me directly at chip@largepracticesales.com. And 7 days a week, I talk to doctors. I love it. I learn something every time. I talked to a doctor this week who's doing $1.6 million in collections per chair out of 4 chairs. We did a deal last month for $62 million for a single office GP practice with 4,000 square feet. Think about that. It's crazy how different every dental practice is.
I need more square feet.
No,
My
Oh my
goodness.
God.
it's a great time to be a dentist, and dentists should understand their options and their opportunities.
Absolutely.
For
Well,
sure.
Chip, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a great conversation and just something that I think at least gets the wheels turning for every single practice owner. So, again, like I'm so glad you have found the time to join us for the second time, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
I promise to shave next time. Thank you for
No,
having me. I really appreciate it.
I love you in vacation mode. So you enjoy the rest of your vacation and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thanks for being
Enjoy
here,
the rest of
friends.
your summer.
Thank you. All right, everybody, for Dentistry Unmasked, thank you so much for joining us. And we can't wait to see you all next week. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone, for watching or listening to the show this week. And thanks to our guests and sponsors on this episode.
Please check out our social media at Dr. Pamela_Maragliano and at Dental Economics Official.
Or you can check me out at igniteDDS or at Dr. David Rice.
And go to dentaleconomics.com to receive dental economics. You can choose to receive DE in print or digitally, and you can also get the details of our Principles of Practice Management conference on our website.
If you have topics or guests or anything you'd like to talk about on the show, send us an email to dentistryunmaskedpodcast@gmail.com, and we will do our very best to make it happen. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.